Oh my God, we're dressed alike.
Of course we are.
Well, we'll just, what the heck? I have a little more gray hair than you though, so that's the only thing that's a little bit different. So
But you do have more hair than I do, really, if we were to turn our heads. So we got to figure it all together here as we play.
lovely.
This time, we ask that you turn off your portable electronic devices or turn them to airplane mode.
But I'm excited to have you here. Let me do my proper intro.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name's Alan McLaren. I am the co-founder of Strata Originals. On this podcast, we interview what the name would imply, originals. These are leaders who stand out by the lessons and stories that they share to help us all grow as leaders and as humans, because we're going to talk about that. Our guest today is a good friend of mine, Scott Mordell. Scott is a global business leader with over 30 years of experience. We think it's more in various industries. You must have started as a 15-year-old. I don't know. How did that work?
Oh, you're kind.
Yeah, I know I'm kind. I'm trying to suck up for some reason, which I don't know why yet. But right now, Scott is providing strategic business counsel through his company, the Freighter Group, and he also sits on several boards. But Scott is best known, certainly to me, in his role as CEO of YPO. We're going to talk about that a lot today. It's where we met, and we'll get into that in a bit. Previous to YPO, Scott started his career in Detroit, and he's a Red Wings fan. Any other fans as well? No? Chicago, no? A little bit, Chicago?
Chicago a little bit, but when we're talking the real sport, it's the Red Wings.
Right.
You know.
Okay, the Red Wings. And then he was with Deloitte. You try to do Detroit and Deloitte together. Doesn't always work, but it did. And KPMG. Led several companies in several verticals, including healthcare and manufacturing. And prior to YPO, Scott led 5 business segments of the DeCosis Group, which is a private family-owned portfolio of businesses headquartered in Chicago. Interestingly, Scott was also involved in horse racing at Arlington International Race Course, and he facilitated some work with them in legislation to reform the horse racing, and ultimately guided them to a merger with Churchill Downs, which many of you will know, a NASDAQ-listed organization. And that Scott and I have shared many stories about that. It's a really interesting time. We won't talk about Arlington today. We're going to talk about leadership today. On to YPO. So for those who don't know YPO, YPO is a global leadership organization of more than 32,000 CEOs in 140 countries, if you can believe that. And they're shared by the connected belief that the world needs better leaders. YPO member companies have aggregate revenues of about $9 trillion, which makes us the 3rd largest economy in the world, if you think about that. So a lot of power in there. Scott has an MBA and in finance from the Kellogg School at Northwestern, which I believe is in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, and accounting degree from Michigan State. And Scott is also a CPA. Now, what happened in Scott's tenure as YPO's longest-serving CEO? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Membership rates grew 50%, global reach 20%, and retention rates 95%. So some great statistics. And as a CPA, Scott measured those things, I can tell you that. And he also won an award in 2022, first ever Individual Outstanding Leadership Award. And team members rated Scott in the 95th percentile of CEOs on Glassdoor. I can tell you as a member of YPO, I've worked with Scott directly and can validate his excellence. And let's learn more from him today. Scott, welcome to Strata Originals.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind intro too. It's great to be with you, Alan. Yeah. This is fun. Yes.
We're going to begin with an icebreaker, which is YPO tradition, and probably with all the Zoom calls today, a tradition in many, many meetings. Right. You've always said YPO scales trust better than any organization in the world. So tell me, how do others earn your trust?
Thank you. That's such a loaded word in terms of how it gets packed and unpacked. And we don't have enough time today to really totally unpack it. But first, what is trust, right? Trust is ultimately, and I heard it really well defined, it's a relationship with the unknown, okay? 2 people together, there's so much we don't know about each other. And so the more we can make the unknown known, the more we can decide what to rely upon and really how much we're willing to give of ourselves, typically as time would go. So in that sense, it really is true. Your reputation does precede you, okay? How I might perceive somebody's previous experiences, previous participation, previous competencies That all rolls into the trust determination. But then when one goes beyond character and competence, however perceived, it comes into what do you do? And so for me, what builds trust for me on top of all that is, first of all, my perception that we have aligned intentions, that we may not be trying to do the same thing, but we're working in the same direction. And in that sense, there's also some goodwill, meaning that I don't believe you're going to cut my legs off if I look behind my back and find out you're taking me down. Okay, so really that sense of goodwill that we're really trying to help each other advance is a big component of trust. And it's kind of a toggle switch, really. If you don't feel that goodwill, that aligned intention, it's really hard to say you can build trust in really any other matter. Then there's what I call authentic integrity, and that's really where one does what they say and they say what they mean. And it's a pretty loaded phrase, but when you find that alignment of reliability in what you're hearing, and people prove it with their actions, that creates a base of which creates greater trust for me. And then finally, it's regular communication. We tend to suspect what we don't know about, and so some kind of frequency of connection really does help foster trust. So it's really those four things: the aligned intentions, the goodwill, the authentic integrity, and then continuous communication.
So let me build on that, even though it's an icebreaker, but I think my experience when I meet fellow YPOers, there's an instant bond and trust. And I use that same thing generally in my life, but I don't always get the reciprocity or that vulnerability. Do you have that same experience when you're dealing with folks outside the organization?
Yeah, very much. And in fact, it's a little stark, right? Because within the YPO community, when so much of it is fostered culturally, it kind of takes me back when I experience a different vibe outside of YPO. And for all of our listeners, not to suggest that YPO is perfect and it's Pollyannish in every different way, but it is quite there. And yes, and so I go slower, and what I find is I spend more time asking questions, listening, and really being very express about my intentions and the questions that I'm hearing. So it just goes a little slower, but it certainly happens in very meaningful ways.
You know, it's interesting because it's a reflection of, use the word culture, that there's a culture and a standard inside the organization. And you're right, it's not perfect, but on average, I'd say most of the members kind of subscribe to that. But it really talks to how one organization can be a certain way and other organizations or the greater society is different. And it's fascinating to me of how 32,000 members in 140 countries can have that, we'll call it glue, you know?
Yeah, it is interesting, but think about the scalability toward other organizations. We're all products of organizations, whether it's traffic safety and everything else. I mean, we touched many organizations just being here today, every single day as it goes along, and they all have their own cultures, these organizations, and in that sense, being reminded that culture is really a collection of habits that build up over time. And the habits that build up over time are the ones that are positively reinforced within that community, right? And so it's just a matter of recognizing that there's different cultures, just as we need to accept each of us as individuals as different people because we come from different experiences, regardless of our race and religion and all the rest of those things. I think companies and organizations, profit, not for profit, are very similar that way.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's just, I think it's an interesting social experiment when you think about it too. But as you said, we'd only have 40 minutes today, so we can that'll be a whole Harvard experience. Let's start with your backstory, Scott, a little bit. I've read the extensive bio with the audience, but can you share some highlights, core lessons, influences, or mentors you had along the way that kind of shaped you to the guy you are today?
Thank you very much. I'm a collection of chapters, and I'm on a chapter. My book's not written yet, so in that sense, I'm still going. I had my middle-class kid upbringing in Detroit with brothers, very sports-oriented, a growth environment, and that my father was the first one in his family to graduate from college. He was very education-oriented. And so all he ever asked me and my friends, literally from the time we were toddlers until the time after we graduated from whatever we did, was, where are you going to school? What are you doing next? What's your career all about? And so there was a strong movement to be very intentional about what I was doing. And so I went into public accounting. I thought I was going to be an engineer. My dad said I was going into business. I went into business and went into public accounting because every business keeps score. It was a great way to kind of survey the landscape. And in that sense, that's when I really started to learn quite a bit because I went into two different accounting firms, and people took me under their wing almost immediately. And they weren't assigned to be my mentors or anything like that, but whatever the connection was, somebody took me under their wing. And I've had that experience literally everywhere I've been, I've had countless number of mentors, really, and been very blessed by that because over the course of my career, I've kind of come to the conclusion that nobody's really self-made, okay? Even if they started their business, some customer gave them a break. The bank may have helped fund them, but somebody's expressing and going out of their way to help you succeed. And that's been a big takeaway and highlight. And I could go to each sentence in that biography about who was really looking out for me, and I've been very blessed by that. When I got out of Kellogg, I worked with a family business, and it's called the Duchossois family. They were kind of iconic conglomerate of businesses in Chicago, and the founder was named Dick Duchossois, and his son was named Craig Duchossois, and they were very different people, but both incredible mentors to me as I've grown along. And so I've just got life lessons that continue to get reinforced. And that's pretty much my highlight. I come through all of this realizing that all of it, you can have a great strategy. You can be the smartest person in the room. And unless you're typing code, if you have to work with other people, it ends up being all about people. And so that's the big motivation for me when I reshape my world and I look at it as a people puzzle, not a business strategy puzzle. It's far more fun. And that was really my YPO experience. It was the ultimate in people puzzles, just because of the number of people involved in everything that we did together, Alan, and beyond is really fun. So I'm a collection of all of that now. And I've been fortunate to be able to take a little space in between my chapters when I get a chance to reflect and look back and build myself and build an agenda for what I want to be as I go forward. So it's semi-reflected life as it goes, but certainly it's a lot of fun.
8 chapters to be written still, as they said, right? So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nowhere close.
So my apologies for butchering the Duchossois name at the beginning. So I butchered that really well.
It's not the first time, my friend. Yeah.
Well, I just read it and it kind of came out, and I should have known better because I speak French. But anyways, I screwed that up really well. But I'm interested in the mentor thing because normally people think of mentorship as a formal relationship. I will be a mentor, you will be a mentee. Let's set that up. Like, even in YPO we have that. But you really had an informal way of doing that. And can you tell me a little bit more about how that naturally just came about?
Thank you. I think it starts where you started our discussion, really in and around trust. Okay, when there's some aligned intention and some goodwill toward one another, it's fairly natural to want to give to that other person to help them succeed. Okay, and so I've been fortunate. I've been able to build trust fairly quickly with people I come in contact with. And I'm earnest. I'm willing to work hard. I think I'm humble, which is maybe means I'm not humble. But the take is I'm always listening and self-evaluating, and in that sense, I hear and try to act on what people share with me. So I think I've just my natural way of being receptive, but also giving. I go out of my way to help the people that I'm associating with, and sometimes there's a natural reciprocity of a relationship. And I hate to call it transactional because it never is. But when you're willing to give, it's amazing how much more comes back to you. And that's really been a natural trend. And I would encourage everybody to find those trustworthy kind of relationships, nurture them, and they become mutual learning experiences if you're really open to it.
It's a beautiful thing you just said, because that's my experience in YPO is, and we call ourselves connectors, right? People who want to really genuinely help people with no expectation of return. And I think that last sentence is the key. I'm giving for the reason I want to support you and help you, not because I expect something back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's so much literature in and around that validates that. But I find that I learned from a book, but I really learned from personal experience. And I would put a big exclamation point on that, because that's really my experience.
And the other thing that's really cool about it is when you help somebody, I mean, we know, even charity wise, we know that there's true fulfillment in
Oh,
that,
yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
excellent. So we're gonna go into the YPO stuff. So before you joined YPO as CEO, you were a member and still are a member.
Still are. You
What
betcha.
attracted you to the role?
Well, first it was the
Craziness?
cause. No. So well, I'm clearly crazy. Okay. But, the cause matters. I came out of some different businesses and manufacturing and the rest, and some people might look at them up from the outside and say, well, what's the big improve the world cause of this? And I'll always say that employing other people, helping them nurture their families, and providing products that serve needs in the overall economy is actually making the world better. And there's ways to do that make the world better. But I love YPO's mission, still do. And the idea that if we can help 32,000 leaders become better people and better leaders, guess what? Guess how many people they touch? Okay, the 9 million employees, countless number of customers, even their families, when they're nurturing people and helping lives develop. It was the thing about YPO is like you're kind of right in the middle. If you can ripple out some learning and plant some seeds, just the benefit is wide. The challenge of that is you never really get to see it in action, because it's but you have to know that it's true. So that was the first draw. I was always into that. The second part is, as I was going through the process, which when I started, I wasn't really expecting to get hired. I just kind of going through the process. I met incredible people and people that I wouldn't have met otherwise. And at first I thought they were going to be a bunch of, big, look at me, young CEOs, and here we go, and this is what it all is. But there was just this incredible humility and service culture around the people that I met. And that was just really inspiring for me. And then the globality of it was fantastic. I had done quite a bit of global travel and global work in my previous roles. And coming into YPO was a wonderful way to nurture that and grow upon that. And it's been a great privilege. So, and I admired the organization. So when I finally somehow came out of the meat grinder of the interview process and came out the other side, I have no idea how. Don't know what they saw in me. I don't know. But it was just such a privilege to be offered. It was like I've really got to deliver here. So it was all those things added together.
And as a mirror to that, you, as someone who worked with you in context, not direct reporting, the passion and values come through. And so we started with the conversation on trust and how do you build that with diverse people and diverse needs and all that other stuff. And you were magical at that, because it was not easy. And we're going to talk a little bit about that balancing in a moment, which is really tough. I'd be curious about, when you joined you're now the CEO of an organization. Did you see something different from the inside that you didn't see from the outside? And what were a few of those things that you might be able to share?
Oh, yeah. Fortunately, having the opportunity to be a member was a way to experience some of it a bit, right? But when I got on the inside, if you will, I was amazed at how much more vast YPO was than I had any clue. Okay, just the level of activity, the different opportunities for people to engage and grow, it was just extraordinary. And I had no idea, because I came up through the Chicago chapter, a sizable chapter, and a very proud chapter and a really good business community, and did some things globally, but not. I was just amazed at how global and what the reach is of YPO. The second thing is nobody's in charge. Okay, so I'm the CEO responsible for this and everything else, but practically it's a very loose confederation. Okay, there's so many member volunteers and so many different organizations and interests and activity threads that nobody's really in charge. And this might shock you, Alan. It shocked me, but CEOs don't want to take direction from another CEO. Yes, Yes, it's shocking. So in that sense, that's where you and I talk about the culture of YPO being so strong. I think a loose confederation where people aren't following direction and don't really have a lot of respect for authority to begin with, because in their own lives they are the authorities in a large part. It has to be the culture and the common interest and the enthusiasm that weaves everything together. And that was really took me a little while to appreciate, like about 30 days. Okay. And then after that, it was realizing that, okay, I'm gonna have to get really comfortable not being able to truly control things in the way that I did in my other organizations. And I'm going to have to get really comfortable with a lot of ambiguity because it's just there's too much to really live in a command and control life within YPO, and it wouldn't work if somebody tried it.
Interesting. And I want to dive into that a little bit more.
Sure.
But I'm curious about your perspective as being the CEO and a customer of your own organization as a member.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how did that go for you? Like, what was the experience like?
Yeah. Well, thank you. First of all, the big red flag all the time is it's easy to think you understand all of the customers, and therefore if it works for me, it's going to work for everybody. And there's a constant flag that you got to be careful not to market to oneself or design for oneself. And so, but what I did have was a great sense of understanding of the context of a member. Okay, meaning that she or he, it's lonely at the top. We're always looking for a place where we can really kind of be ourselves. Outside of YPO, everybody's trying to get in your pocket. Everybody's trying to get you to hire their kid. Everybody's trying to get a hearing with you because you might do business with them, so on and so forth. But in YPO, that context, that I understand what it is to be in the leadership role with all those questions and not too many places in life to be truly vulnerable. So I check let's not market to myself. Let's listen. Let's experiment like crazy and really see what begins to have traction and build enthusiasm, and not do it because I thought I liked it, but also recognizing I can understand why some things didn't work in hindsight always, but just because of the context of the member.
Interesting. And as we think through the confederation you were talking about, right?
Yeah.
So YPO also has about 10,000 of the 32,000 that are volunteers every year, kind of making a lot of the events and calling the CEO every day as part of their, not all 10,000, but I'm sure it felt like that sometimes. But you talked about their strong-willed, passionate, opinionated, all the authority things. Yeah. They don't necessarily take direction well. But coming out of that, the words leading leaders is a pretty high form of leadership. Can you describe how you did that? Because ultimately you had to lead leaders in some context. How did you achieve that?
Thank you. First of all, I want to go a little deeper into the context. So I worked for 11 different chairmen. Okay. I had 76 different directors over the course of my almost 10 years. All of whom we would consider very close forum-like relationships because we were together for at least 3 years in the context of that. At YPO Global, there were 90 different member-led governance groups, okay? And more than 1,700 member officers across just at the global umbrella of YPO, okay? And then at YPO Global, we'd have roughly 700-800 events that were truly international global events, all of whom were led by a champion or a committee of champions. And then we had over 470 chapters, okay, each of whom had their own leadership groups, were actually independent of my line of authority, and were all had their own opinions about what they should be doing. Okay, so it's just a giant confederation of a lot of energy, and so I found that very exciting because if it's easy to lead in a company where you've invested the capital and it's your money you're doing something on, or you've got the formal line of authority, and it's very clear because you have more levers to motivation and on all the rest of that, and people naturally follow capital, okay, in businesses as it goes. In YPO, every member is equal. Okay, there is no capital, and there's really no line of authority, and that people admonish. So in that sense, it's a petri dish of leadership, because you never in our regular lives and regular business, you want to use your authority as little as possible, and just have common interest, common cause, and people solving problems really kind of carry the day. And YPO was like an exaggerated petri dish of science experiment as to how that works. And loved it, because that's where I come out with this idea very much that the leadership is really, it's all about people. And there's two quotes I want to share, because I found them sharing them with myself over and over and over again. Okay. And one is that great millennial and Gen Z leader, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Okay. And he said way back in the day, in the 50s, I think it was, that management is the art of getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. Okay. And this idea that people need to feel their own mission, their own sense of autonomy and mastery, and all the rest of that all falls within that in my take to it. And it's just really recognizing that people choose their own behavior. And so I can't dictate behavior. I have to create the conditions to where I'm hoping that they choose the behavior in the direction that we're framing out for them, and giving them the opportunity to perform. And so that I was very reminded of that, and I think it works with leaders, and it's worked with me in situations where I've got more control than I did at YPO, and whether they're leaders or not leaders. The other great quote is a human truism from that great business leader, Oprah Winfrey. Okay. Mm-hmm. You may know that she hosted a talk show for a number of years. That's really kind of what broke her through. And when she was leaving the talk show, got an award, she had talked about, I think it was 2005 or so, talking about, look at that chair. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. 30,000 people have sat in that chair. And she interviewed, just celebrities and just everybody in between and the rest. And she said, every single one of them wanted the same thing. And they wanted to be validated. Okay. They wanted to matter. And so I think the sense of meaningful appreciation and validation of somebody's contribution, somebody's worth, somebody as a person, irrespective sometimes of the actual performance, is a very key way to keep them motivated, and actually enhance their motivation. But also they tend to work toward good solutions. So I think this recognizing we're people first, we need to be validated. I want to be appreciated. I don't like not being appreciated. And also the idea that I choose my own behavior. And so those two ideas really do lay into leading leaders, but they lay into leading everybody else too.
Very human statement. At the end of the day, we're all coming at it from that human condition, and we just happen to be in these roles. But mm-hmm. It's a really a wonderful way to think about it, because it's about what pushes humans in every relationship.
Exactly.
So it's you don't have to be different. You don't have to be on. So one of the things that I observed as in working with you, sitting on the international board, so you have your hundreds of employees where you have the opportunity to be command and control. Mm-hmm. It's your staff. They're in lots of countries around the world, 30 or 40 countries around the world, different cultures. Mm-hmm. You have a board of directors, of which you have a chairperson every year, that has about 20, a little bit less today, but 20 odd leaders represent all the world. And then you have your membership in the committees and all the things that you have that everybody thinks they or wants to have a voice. What I'm curious about is, let's start with the first one. How did you straddle the command and control opportunity? Let's leave it that way. I don't want to say that's what happened. And the volunteer piece, that where you were really at 32,000 bosses in all the ways. How did you straddle that? Because that's not an interesting, easy balance.
No, and tactically it's very difficult, but strategically it's not that. For me, the way that I look at it, wasn't that difficult. Okay, and so I need to show up tactically different for the situation, but I need to show up as the same person across all of this. And so I settled my confidence. My comfort comes from very good clarity about what my principles are. Okay. And so when I sat down with the board in 2010 or whenever I was interviewing, I literally handed them a one pager that I have, which is Scott's Business Principles. And I said, slid it across the table. And I said, this is Scott in a box. Okay. This is who I aspire to be. This is who I think I am. And this is what's going to be important to me. And so irrespective of our business goals and all the rest of that stuff, these are the principles I'm going to do things by. If they're not right for you, then don't hire me because we're not going to fit. If they feel right to you, then let's evaluate me on these principles. And so literally every single board evaluation of the CEO, I evaluated myself. I answered their questions, but I evaluated myself on my principles. And the same principles I shared with my employees and asked them to evaluate me based on those principles. And I think when things are complicated, you have to have a principle to fall back on. And that will guide your behavior, guide your decision making, and guide your conduct. And so, just real quickly, one is whatever we do on purpose, okay, with purpose. And so, it's the idea is that you're working toward an end, and you're being intentional. You're not just being random. The second is align the organization and its stakeholders to an important cause to improve society. We have to feel that we're serving something that's bigger than ourselves. And when people feel that motivation, it allows context to what people are doing. Third is provide a company environment where people can do their very best work. I firmly believe that people are brilliant and wonderful because of their strengths, not because they spend all their time trying to minimize their weaknesses. And if all anybody does is spend their time minimizing their weaknesses, you get a bunch of average people. Okay, I'd rather spend more time on where people are great and strong, and allow that to be wonderful, and mitigate the weaknesses where they become challenges. Then there's relentless focus on learning, execution, and achievement. You just have to, when you decide you're going to do a path, you have to go all in for it. And that's particularly important. And then finally, serve with a passion for helping others succeed. And so those are the 5 kind of fits. And what I do as a business leader is it's not about Scott Mordell. It was never about Scott Mordell. It will never be about the leader. It's really about the mission that we've carved up. And so I decided I have to 100% I got to subjugate myself to the mission. Okay, I have to be the mission. And if I can be the mission, I will be a service-oriented leader. I will back off when I'm a little agitated. I will not seek headlines because when you do that, people feel diminished because they feel like they've contributed into those kinds of headlines. So I always feel I'm not leading from behind. I'm literally leading from the fabric of what matters, and subjugate yourself to your mission. It's very hard to put your ego to the side, but if you're willing to do that, and that's a principle I carved in, I've just had great success with that all along.
So it sounds like you just had this core of which, as you suggested, the tactics are a little bit different, but when you have that core principle, everything can bounce off of that, and you become a role model without trying to be a role model, but you're role modeling the behaviors that I'm sure there were moments that you had to take some deep breaths if you're listening to some things. Yeah. So the other thing I'd be curious about, talking about you now. Walk me through, and I know there was no typical day, but just give me a sense of the day in the life of Scott Mordell. And I'm taking this to a place where, how did you manage the energy? Because, hours, travel, walk me through that so leaders can understand that there's some complex jobs that you need to control your energy and yourself and your health, and walk me through that.
Thank you. It's been quite a wave of change over time, and I think at times I was managing my energy really well, and other times I wasn't. But the last several years, I've gotten very good about managing my energy, and it's really with this truly intentional kind of approach. I get up in the morning, and I've got a series of reflections that take me literally 5 minutes to go through. And I've written them out, and they're a series of reflections that point me to the fact that ultimately help me conclude that one, time is precious. I'm not going to live forever. People really matter, and reconnect with what matters to me. And I get to choose my behavior for the day. beyond that, I spent some time really thinking about who I'm grateful for, because again, it's all about people for me. So who am I'm grateful for, and who I'm really concerned for, because maybe people everybody's going through some struggles. So I run through an inventory of gratitude, and then also just awareness about some of the struggles people are doing. And then just a 10-minute meditation in the morning, kind of riding off of that, just really helps. And then a little bit of stretching. And by the time I do that over the course of an hour, I feel like I've stopped like all the flurry of thoughts and activities and all the rest of that stuff from really taking off. And so that allows me to really contemplate, set my intention for the day, and also go okay. Without that, in the course of a day, sometimes when I'm traveling or with time zones, I get off of that. I find all I'm doing is grinding myself down, and then I got to recharge in a different way. But this idea of living in some gratitude, being continuously self-reflective, and really continuously empathetic, enables the tactical work of the day. Okay, we got to close this deal. We got to do this sales meeting. We got to bring this group together and solve a problem. Those are all they're all people oriented, and I show up much differently when I'm well grounded this way, as opposed to when I just show up in kind of in a flurry.
It's interesting because when we talk about the form experience that we all go through in YPO, and for folks that are listening, form is really a gathering of 7 or 8 or 10 leaders every month, and it's kind of like your personal board of directors talking principles and stuff. And when we approach that, sometimes we're running from other things, and we have to settle in and breathe our way into a place of safety.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't typically do that with ourselves.
A lot of people, right? Yeah.
Right, where we just run from one Zoom meeting to a thing, and we're always in our head a lot of ways, as opposed to getting to a place where you can think better when you're breathing better, and things that you talked about earlier. So I think it's a great lesson for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good friend of ours, one of our fellow board members, Scott Chu, I'll never forget him sharing this with me. He says, "Scott, your mind is like a cup of coffee, okay? And so you fill that cup of coffee up, because we fill our cup of life full all the time, right? And if it's full from the previous day, guess what your coffee is today? It says it's cold, okay? So you have to empty out the cup to make room for new. And if you want to be new and excited about new, you have to keep emptying the cup. And to me, that's a big part of the grounding, to not allow the flurry to kind of just build, but to try to pause it. And I sound very Zen-like right now, and you know what? It's a continuing practice and journey, and sometimes I'm good at it, sometimes I'm not. But when it's working well, it really works for me.
But you know what I love about that conversation? It's about pulling back always to the middle, right? Life, I don't know if there's such a thing as work-life balance, but knowing your center allows you to come back to it, whether it's breathing or energy or life. Life sometimes gets out of control, right? We all have that.
Right.
That's just
right. And you perform better from your center. Okay. And you make better decisions. You think maximally in terms of how you can think. When you realize that stress is a choice, it's not really outside driven. It's a choice you're making to based in fear and all the rest of that stuff. If you can minimize that and stay at that center, you're going to perform much better. Yeah. And so I'm sure I had one of the Christian brothers when I was in high school tell me all of this, but it but it didn't all resonate, until through some experience. And that's kind of the journey of both experiential as well as learning from other people's stories from me.
Well, you know what, Mike Tyson, not the most eloquent dude in the world, but everything changes when you get punched in the mouth, right? So, right, and it's the same in leadership, right? Is that you read all the books and you get out there, but then you're having a difficult conversation with someone in the real world. The practice of that and the execution of that, if it's done in a caring, empathetic way, not easy. But
no, and it's usually the challenge is always the ego, in my opinion. Okay, and so if many of your listeners who are not CEOs, and you're thinking about the CEO, whether she or he is like really on top of it, you know what? they're struggling, they're going through all kinds of different things, and I won't say they're human too, because that's kind of almost trite. But you know what? They're not perfected, okay? And so in that sense, when I learned on the other side, which is to realize I don't have to be perfected, I just have to be Scott, okay? And so in this day and age, there's no way I can know the organization from every single perspective. So somebody always knows something I'm not doing well, okay? And so the key is not to defend it and tell them that they're wrong. The key is to take it in, acknowledge it, and say you investigate it. And of course, you have to prioritize it relative to the bigger goals. But there's a vulnerability on the leader side to share some of that in a way that's not ways that destroy confidence in your leadership and competence, but you can be aware of that. And I think people, I've always had good reaction to it when I tried to do that, as opposed to be the bulletproof leader who has all the answers, because one, you never do, and two, people you're talking to don't think you do, and it ends up being a charade. So it's more connecting and more productive to be truly authentic.
Love it. I'd love to end on that word, because at the end of the day, that's what I always experience with you as an authentic leader, and that just allows for better trusting relationships and better outcomes. So thank you for ending on the word that I love the most, authentic. Scott, thank you for spending time with us. Some great lessons, and it's always nice to connect with you. And thanks for spending time with us today. Some great lessons for everybody.
Thank you for the honor. It's really good to be with you, and keep your leadership journey and student approach going. It's really been inspiring for me, and the other things that you've done. So thank you.
Thanks, my friend. Be well.
Okay. Be well. Okay. Bye for now.